The bar was dim, quiet, and nearly empty, just the way I needed it to be. I sat there with a half-full glass of red wine. My second that night, maybe third. I'd lost count. Strangely, I wasn't tipsy, not even close. The alcohol refused to touch the gnawing storm inside me. I wasn't drinking to celebrate or unwind. I was drinking to numb, but the numbness wouldn't come. Not tonight. Not after what I had heard just hours earlier. If this had been any other evening, I might have admired the rustic charm of the place, the warm minimalist design, the soft glow of pendant lights casting a gentle amber over wood and stone. But today, nothing could reach me. Nothing could penetrate the fog that had settled over my brain, thick and paralyzing. It was supposed to be a routine checkup, just a quick lunchtime visit to the company clinic, part of the standard health screening for employees. I remember tapping my foot impatiently in the waiting room, annoyed that the nurse was running behind. I had emails to answer, reports to review, and barely enough time to grab a sandwich before the next meeting. I didn't expect anything more than a few stamps and signatures on a form. But then the doctor called me in and said, "We need to talk." He was an older man, gray around the temples, eyes too gentle for the words he was about to say. He asked me to sit, and that's when the world began to unravel. Breast cancer, aggressive, already spreading to the lymph nodes. He didn't sugarcoat it, which I appreciated in a detached, twisted sort of way. He laid it out plainly. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, 6 months, if I delayed, 9 if I was lucky, a year at best, if everything went right. I heard the words. I nodded when he paused. I even thanked him before leaving his office, but none of it felt real. It was like watching a movie where I was both the main character and a dispassionate observer. I walked back to the office, sat at my desk, and typed numbers into spreadsheets like a ghost. The truth didn't hit me until I got home that evening. The moment I shut the front door behind me, the air in the apartment felt heavier, staler. I stood in the hallway, still holding my purse, staring into the shadows of a life I'd built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice for a family that had long stopped seeing me. My husband Andrew was sprawled on the couch in his usual spot, eyes glued to the television, controller in hand. He didn't even glance at me when I came in. "Dinner," he mumbled, barely audible over the sound of gunfire from his game. I didn't answer. I just kept walking until I reached the bedroom, locked the door, and let the first tear fall. Not because I was dying, not yet, but because I'd spent 20 years keeping this family afloat, dragging a lifeless marriage behind me like dead weight, convincing myself that things would eventually get better, that somehow, someday, I'd be seen. And now, with a silent killer growing inside me, I realized no one had ever really looked, no one but me. I returned to the bar hours later, dressed in the same work clothes, now wrinkled and tight around my chest where the tumor had made its quiet home. And here I was, swirling wine in a glass, pretending that something, anything, might dull the sound of that doctor's voice in my head. 6 months, maybe 9. That's all the time I had left. Andrew hadn't always been this way, or maybe he had, and I just didn't want to see it. When we first met, he was charming in that easy, unthreatening kind of way. He had this boyish smile, a guitar slung over his shoulder, and a softness to his voice that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He could talk about literature and music and made you believe he had depth. I was in my early 20s, working my way through accounting school, living on canned soup and hope, and he was beautiful in a way that made struggle feel worth it. But beauty fades, and so does charm. What remains is character, and Andrew didn't have any. He moved in with me before we even got married. Said his lease was up and I was too in love to say no. At the time, I thought we were building something, but really, I was the one building, and he was just there. Always there playing video games, reading self-help books he never finished, watching videos about how to manifest success. But not once did he ever go out and actually look for a job. Not seriously. The only time he ever showed any real motivation was when he found some online business course claiming to teach you how to make 6 figures from home. He begged me to cover the cost. $2,000 we didn't have. He promised it would change everything. It didn't. 2 weeks later, he called it a scam and went back to the couch like nothing had happened. I was the one who paid off that credit card, just like I paid for the rent, the groceries, the bills, the furniture, even the damn gaming console he spent most of his waking hours glued to. When our daughter Lena was born, it was me who got up at 3 a.m. for feedings, me who went back to work after 8 weeks so we wouldn't fall behind on the mortgage, me who handled every doctor's appointment, every school meeting, every scraped knee and fever. Andrew, he'd bring me a glass of water now and then, maybe heat up leftovers, and every time he acted like he'd just rescued me from a burning building. His mother, Margaret, never once saw anything wrong with him. She called him my sweet boy, well into his 30s, and every time we argued, she'd be on the phone within the hour. Helen, he's just sensitive, she'd say. You need to encourage him, not criticize. Encourage what? His high scores on Xbox. After years of begging her to help him get on his feet, Margaret finally pulled some strings and got him a job with the city, assisting visiting dignitaries. It was the perfect setup. Schmoozing, dressing nice, pretending to matter. But even that he managed to screw up. Called a mayor's young wife his daughter. Forgot to notify hotel staff about, a situation involving a guest and a woman who wasn't his wife. It wasn't long before he was let go. Too much liability, they said. After that, he just gave up entirely. He stopped pretending. He'd wake up at noon, shuffle around in sweatpants, and complain about the noise from the construction across the street. Meanwhile, I was clocking 60 hours a week keeping the lights on. Once I tried to lay down the law, told him he'd be responsible for cleaning and making dinner. He waved his hand like he was granting me a royal favor. Sure, babe, no problem. That lasted 3 days. Even Lena noticed. At 20, she was already juggling school and a part-time job, but she still managed to do more around the house than her father. One night after a long shift, she came home to find me scrubbing the kitchen floor. She looked at Andrew lounging on the couch and said flatly, "You know, if you're going to be useless, at least don't be in the way." He didn't respond, just paused his game, looked at her, then back at the screen. That was when I realized my daughter had grown up watching me carry this entire family, and she was already learning not to make the same mistake. Lena was my only child, my one quiet miracle in a life that had become painfully predictable. I gave birth to her in the middle of a snowstorm in a rundown hospital on the south side of Chicago, while Andrew paced the hallway like a nervous actor playing the role of concerned husband. He held her once, maybe twice, then quickly returned to whatever distraction waited on his phone. But I didn't care. She was mine. Her tiny fists, her squinting eyes, the way she grasped my finger like she knew. I was all she had from the beginning. I promised myself she would never feel the kind of loneliness I'd felt growing up. She would never question whether she mattered. I worked overtime to keep her in private school as long as I could. I skipped lunch for years just to save up for her violin lessons. Every report card, every honor roll ribbon, every tiny win, those were my oxygen, and she didn't disappoint. Lena was bright, driven. sharp-witted in ways that reminded me of my young, the routine kind of how are you people toss around. She meant it. She watched me. She saw the circles under my eyes and the tension in my jaw when I opened the bills. I'd always told myself I stayed with Andrew for her, that having a father, even a useless one, was better than none. That maybe, just maybe, she needed the image of a full home more than she needed truth. But she saw through it. Long before I was ready to admit it to myself, Lena had already decided she'd never follow in my footsteps. When she brought home her boyfriend, Val, for the first time, I was skeptical. Another boy who dressed like he'd just rolled out of bed, soft-spoken and slightly awkward, but he had this quiet integrity. He listened when people spoke. He didn't try to impress me, just treated my daughter with warmth and respect. Still, I warned her. "You want a life like mine?" I asked. "You want a man who sits on the couch while you break your back to feed him?" She smiled. "Val's not like that, Mom. He actually shows up." Andrew, of course, hated Val, said he was soft, said Lena could do better. Ironic, coming from a man who hadn't held a real job in 2 decades. One night, Lena clapped back. "Don't worry, Dad. I'm not trying to marry someone like you. I should have said something, should have softened the blow. But instead, I swallowed my pride and kept stirring the soup, pretending I didn't just witness my daughter reclaim her voice in the very house that had silenced mine for years. It happened on a Tuesday night just after dinner. I had barely touched my plate. Some leftover pasta I reheated more out of habit than hunger. Andrew had eaten like a man who'd worked a full shift, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and asked if we were out of cookies. That was it. That was the extent of our interaction that day. I stood at the sink, staring down at the greasy dishes, my hand submerged in lukewarm water, the hum of the dishwasher mixed with the sounds of gunfire from the living room, where Andrew was already back in front of his game, and something snapped. I dried my hands slowly, walked into the living room, and stood in front of the TV. He didn't even look up, just leaned to the side, trying to see past me. "Can you move?" he said, eyes fixed on the screen. "I went to the doctor today," I said quietly. That got his attention. He paused the game and looked up with exaggerated annoyance. "Yeah, what for?" I took a breath that burned going down. "I have cancer for a second. Nothing." Then he blinked. "What kind?" "Breast. It's spread. Stage 3. I'll need surgery, chemo, the whole thing." He made a face like I just told him. The washing machine broke. "Jesus. That sucks." "That's it?" I asked, voice trembling. "That's all you have to say?" He shrugged. "What do you want me to do, Helen?" "Cry." I stared at him, at the man I had once married, at the pile of blankets he'd wrapped himself in like royalty, and I heard my own voice crack, more with disbelief than emotion. "I might die, Andrew." He sighed like I was being dramatic. "You won't. You're too stubborn. People like you live forever just to drive the rest of us crazy." And that was it. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I simply turned around, walked into our bedroom, grabbed a laundry basket and started pulling his clothes from the closet. Shirt after shirt, sock after sock, everything he owned. I moved like someone possessed. "What the hell are you doing?" he called from the hallway. "Freeing myself," I muttered. By the time he caught up to me, I was already out on the balcony launching his belongings over the railing. It wasn't graceful. His boxers fluttered in the wind like ridiculous white flags. A couple walking their dogs stopped and stared as a hoodie landed at their feet. I didn't care. I wanted the world to see. Let them all watch me purge the years I'd wasted. Andrew tried to grab my arm. "Have you lost your mind?" I jerked away, eyes blazing. "Get out tonight. You're being insane." He sputtered. You need help. No, Andrew. What I need is space to breathe without stepping over your dirty socks. I need peace. I need to survive. And I can't do that with you draining the air from this apartment like a goddamn parasite. He stood there stunned, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then he did the only thing he'd ever learned to do. He called his mother. Mama, he said, his voice shaky. She's lost it. She's throwing my stuff off the balcony. Come get me. I slammed the door before he could finish, and for the first time in over 20 years, I felt clean. It didn't take long, maybe 45 minutes after Andrew made the call. I heard heavy footsteps storming down the hall. Margaret didn't knock. She pounded. 3 short, violent bursts like she was the police. I opened the door and there she was, face red, curls bouncing from the force of her indignation, coat slipping off one shoulder like she'd rushed out of the house in a blind rage. What the hell is going on here? She barked, eyes darting past me into the apartment. Andrew says, You've lost your damn mind. I didn't flinch. He can explain that to you while he's picking his socks out of the bushes. She shoved past me into the living room, arms flailing like she owned the place. I knew it. I knew something was off with you. My poor son. He gives you the best years of his life, and this is how you repay him. I almost laughed. The best years of his life. Margaret, your son has been living off me like a barnacle for 2 decades. He was trying. He has potential. He just needed more time. He's had 20 years. She paused, took a breath, and lowered her voice in that condescending, overly controlled way she always used when trying to regain power. Helen, sweetheart, I know marriage can be hard, but this drama, it isn't necessary. You've always been the stable one. Oh, I'm still stable, I said coolly, which is why I know I don't want to spend whatever time I have left babysitting a grown man. Her face twitched. What do you mean, time you have left? I folded my arms. I have cancer, Margaret. Stage 3. They found it in my lymph nodes. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. I don't know if it was pity or disbelief or fear, but it passed. And then, in a voice so calm, it chilled me, she said. So if something happens to you, the apartment goes to Andrew, right? I blinked. Are you serious? Well, I mean, you wouldn't want him to be homeless. After all, this is his home, too. No, Margaret, it's my home. I paid for it, every square foot. And don't worry, I've already filed for divorce. The paperwork is in. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. You can't be serious. I'm more serious now than I've ever been. After all we've done for you, what you've done, I snapped, stepping closer, is raise a man who can't wash a dish or hold a job. What you've done is treat me like a caretaker, not a wife. And now that I'm sick, you think you can swoop in and claim what's mine. Margaret's lips trembled, but she didn't cry. That woman was made of vinegar and pride. You will regret this, she hissed. Mark my words. I've regretted a lot of things, I said, opening the door wide. But putting myself first won't be one of them. She stood there, stunned, then finally turned and stormed out. I watched her waddle down the hall, her heels clicking against the tile like angry punctuation. The door shut behind her with a satisfying click, and I exhaled like I hadn't breathed in years. I was still sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty doorway after Margaret left, when I heard another knock. This one was soft, hesitant. I already knew it was Lena. Only my daughter knocked like that, like she was asking permission to enter a world she already belonged to. Mom, she called out as I opened the door. Her face was pale, eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying the whole way over. She stepped inside without waiting for me to speak, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. Dad called me, she blurted. He said, "You threw him out, that you've gone crazy." And then he said something about you being sick. I didn't answer right away. I just led her to the kitchen, sat down at the small table where I used to help her with math homework, where we folded holiday napkins together every Thanksgiving. The apartment was still a mess, clothes strewn everywhere, the air heavy with the scent of lavender cleaner I'd used out of habit. Everything felt wrong, but she was here, and suddenly, I wasn't as scared. She sat across from me, her voice cracking. "Please don't lie to me, Mom. Are you really sick?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I have breast cancer, stage 3. It's spread to my lymph nodes." Lena's face crumpled. She reached for my hand across the table, gripping it with the same fierce desperation she'd had as a child when she fell and scraped her knees. But this time, I couldn't just kiss it and make it better. "How bad is it?" she whispered. I looked her straight in the eyes. "It's bad, but I'm not giving up." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stood up and wrapped her arms around me, pressing her face into my shoulder like she was trying to disappear into my skin. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "You're all I have." I held her tightly, feeling the full weight of her trembling body. My little girl, the one I raised alone in every way that mattered. And now she was the one holding me up. Then suddenly she pulled back, wiping her eyes. Her lips trembled again, but this time with something more than grief. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I furrowed my brow. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words landed like thunder in a quiet room. I blinked. "You're what?" She nodded quickly, tears still in her eyes. "It's early, just a few weeks. I was going to wait to tell you until things settled down, but now I need you to know." For a long moment, I just stared at her, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't expected joy to enter my life again, not like this. And yet, it did. It rushed in like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. It warmed every frozen corner of me. "You're going to have a baby," I whispered. Lena nodded. "And you're going to be a grandmother." A laugh escaped me, raw and breathless. "Well, hell, guess I better not die then." She smiled through her tears, reaching for my hands again. "No, you better not." And just like that, I had something to live for. The next morning, I called my doctor and said the words I'd been avoiding for weeks. "I'm ready to fight." I scheduled the surgery and told them I didn't care how soon it had to be. I wanted it done. The moment Lena told me she was pregnant, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't preparing to die anymore. I was preparing to live. But before I could focus on healing, I needed to fix one more thing. Something I had ignored for years out of fear, out of habit, out of that constant voice in my head saying I wasn't worth more than what I had. That Monday, I walked into work, not just as Helen, the dependable accountant, but as Helen Carter, a woman who had survived things no spreadsheet could calculate. My hands were trembling when I knocked on my boss's office door. Mr. Daniels barely looked up from his screen when I stepped in. "Helen, I thought you were on leave." "I'm taking a medical leave starting next week," I said firmly. "But before I go, I need to talk to you." He raised an eyebrow. "All right." I took a deep breath. I've been here 9 years. I've never taken more than a few sick days. I've handled every quarterly crisis, fixed mistakes other people made, worked weekends without complaining, and I've never once asked for a raise. He leaned back, watching me now. "I need a raise," I said. "Not just for the money, for the principle, for the work I've done, and the value I bring." There was a long pause. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Helen. I'll see what we can do." I left his office with my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. But under the nerves was a quiet pride, like something long buried inside me had finally stood up straight. Over the next few days, as I prepped for surgery, I felt lighter than I had in years. Andrew was gone. Margaret had stopped calling. The apartment was mine again, quiet and full of small comforts I'd forgotten. Sunlight in the mornings, clean sheets that smelled like lavender, a vase of daisies from Lena that sat proudly by the window. And then there was Eric Lawson. He worked in it, quiet, smart, always polite. He'd fixed my computer at least half a dozen times over the years, and every time he did, he'd ask me how I was doing. Not in that empty, polite way people usually did, but like he really wanted to know. After Andrew left, Eric started bringing me coffee in the mornings. At first, I thought it was just kindness. Then he offered to drive me home after a particularly late shift. We started talking, really talking about our lives, our regrets, the things we'd hoped for and let go of. He never pushed, never flirted, just listened, respected the space I needed. Until one night, when we found ourselves sitting outside my building in his old Toyota, the radio playing soft jazz, my hand resting just inches from his on the center console. I looked at him, really looked at him, the gentle lines by his eyes, the warmth in his smile, and something inside me stirred, something I thought had died a long time ago. I reached out, touched his face, and kissed him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fireworks. It was better. It was real. It was quiet and steady and full of all the things I had forgotten love could be. That night, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I slept, knowing that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of my story weren't over yet. After the surgery, everything slowed down. The city buzz that had once pressed against my chest like a weight was replaced by quiet fields, slow mornings, and the rhythmic hum of cicadas in the afternoon. I left Chicago behind for a while and returned to the small town where I grew up, where my mother still lived in the same white cottage with blue shutters and wild roses climbing the porch trail. Mom Tamara Nichols welcomed me home like I was a little girl again. No questions, no judgment, just her arms wide open and her famous chicken soup already simmering on the stove. "You look tired," she said, as she helped me out of the car. "I am," I admitted, "but not just from the surgery." She touched my cheek gently, then rest. Let the quiet mend what life broke. And that's exactly what I did. Her house smelled like old books and lemon oil, and the creaky floorboards felt familiar beneath my feet. I slept in my childhood bedroom, now lined with faded wallpaper and shelves filled with dusty paperbacks. At night, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees outside and Mom humming to herself as she folded laundry or watered her plants. During the day, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, watching the sky change colors. It was like the world had paused just for me to let me breathe, to let me remember who I was before I became someone else's caretaker, before I forgot my own name under the weight of duty. One morning, while walking down the main street with Mom, we ran into Valerie Dempsey, my old high school friend who had become a literature teacher. She still had the same bright eyes, the same warm laugh. She hugged me like no time had passed and insisted we grab coffee at the town diner. Later that week, I saw Toni Mitchell, mother of 5, chaos embodied, and still somehow one of the most grounded people I'd ever known. She handed me a bag of homemade blueberry muffins and said, "Eat something that doesn't come from a hospital tray. You're still Helen, not some porcelain doll." We sat on her porch swing while her youngest built towers with wooden blocks at our feet. We talked about our kids, about the things life had stolen and the things we'd learned to reclaim. There was something healing in those conversations, something real and earthy. and unpolished. No pity, no awkward silences. Just friends, mothers, women who had weathered storms and still stood tall. In those moments, I felt my body begin to heal, but more importantly, my heart began to loosen. The tight knot of fear, anger, and exhaustion slowly unwound. I stopped flinching at the sound of my phone ringing. I started smiling without forcing it. I laughed, really laughed, until tears rolled down my cheeks and my ribs ached. And every night before bed, Mom would sit beside me, brush my hair like she used to when I was a child, and say, "You're still here. That means there's still more joy waiting for you." I believed her. For the first time in years, I truly believed her. It started with nausea, sharp and persistent. At first, I thought it was the lingering effects of chemotherapy, or maybe my body's reaction to the new medications. I had just begun feeling like myself again. My energy was returning in small but meaningful bursts. The walks around the block with Mom no longer left me winded. Food tasted normal again. Life was no longer colorless, but the nausea wouldn't go away. It came in waves, always in the morning, then sometimes at night. I brushed it off at first. Then came the fatigue, bone-deep, inexplicable exhaustion. Probably just my body still healing, I told myself. But a whisper in the back of my mind nagged louder with each passing day. One evening, while I was folding laundry with Mom, the smell of her lavender fabric softener suddenly made my stomach churn. I dropped the warm towel in my hands, ran to the bathroom, and threw up. When I returned pale and shaken, Mom looked at me carefully. "Helen," she said slowly, "when was your last period?" I froze. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. With the surgery, the treatments, the stress, I had lost track completely. I blinked. I don't know. She set down the basket, walked over to me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Honey, maybe it's time to take a test." It felt ridiculous. I was 42. I had cancer. I just had part of my reproductive system surgically removed. Pregnancy was not even in the realm of possibility, or so I thought. The next morning, I sat in a cold clinic room in Flagstaff, waiting for the doctor to return. The seconds stretched out like hours. I wasn't sure what answer I feared more, something new being wrong or something entirely unplanned. When the doctor walked in with a strange smile and said, "Congratulations, Helen. You're about 6 to 7 weeks pregnant," the room tilted. Pregnant. I stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. That can't be right. But it was. My mind spun with questions, shock, and disbelief. After everything, after a diagnosis that nearly ended me, after surgery, radiation, the emotional fallout, the grief, I was pregnant. The doctor explained it gently. "Your treatments didn't remove your entire reproductive system. It's rare, but not impossible. The timing, well, it only takes one window." And I knew that one window had opened the night. I kissed Eric back, let him into my heart and into my life. I walked out of that clinic and sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in and out slowly. Pregnant at 42, after cancer. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not from fear but from something deeper. And maybe the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. I thought I had lost everything, but life had quietly left a gift on my doorstep, one I never dared ask for, one I never expected. I stared at his name on my phone screen for a long time, Eric Lawson. My fingers hovered, hesitated, then retreated more times than I could count. I wasn't sure what I expected from him or what I even wanted. All I knew was that he deserved to know, so I texted him. "Would you meet me for coffee tomorrow afternoon? There's something I need to tell you." He replied almost instantly, "Of course. Just say where." We chose a quiet little spot on the corner of 7th and Maple, neutral ground, not too close to work, not too intimate either, a place where conversations could breathe but not echo. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered chamomile tea, and picked the table near the window. The late autumn light was warm but fading, casting long shadows across the floor. My hands trembled slightly as I cupped the mug. Eric arrived right on time. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a gray jacket, that same calm presence he always carried like a second skin. He smiled when he saw me, and suddenly everything felt both terrifying and safe at once. "Hey," he said, taking the seat across from me. "You look good." I gave a small laugh. Better than a few months ago. We talked for a few minutes, nothing heavy. Work, the weather, a mutual colleague's questionable taste in holiday sweaters. I let the silence linger once the small talk faded. He didn't push, he waited. Finally I said it. "I'm pregnant." His eyebrows rose. A beat passed, then another. "I'm about 7 weeks along," I continued. "I went to the doctor yesterday." I didn't say the rest out loud, but I could see he understood. The math wasn't complicated. His mouth parted slightly. Still no words came. He looked at me, not with fear, not with panic, but something far deeper, a kind of stunned tenderness, like he'd stumbled upon a miracle he hadn't even known he needed. "I'm not asking anything from you," I added quickly. I thought you should know, that's all." He reached across the table slowly, as if he wasn't sure I'd let him. His fingers brushed mine, warm, steady. Still no words, but his eyes met mine, and in that gaze there was everything. A promise, a beginning, and something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. I stayed behind after Eric left. The cafe had thinned out and the golden light outside had turned dusky, brushing the window panes in soft lavender. I sat there with my empty teacup, staring at the swirl of steam that no longer rose. The quiet settled around me like a blanket, not heavy, not suffocating, just still. My fingers rested on my stomach. It still didn't feel real. A child at my age. After everything, I thought of Lena, her face when she told me she was pregnant, how fiercely she clung to me, how terrified and brave she'd been all at once. Soon I would hold my grandchild in my arms, and months later, maybe, God willing, I'd hold my own baby too. I thought of Margaret's face twisted in entitlement, demanding I leave everything behind for her son. I thought of Andrew, of his blank indifference as I dragged my body through chemotherapy, and he asked what was for dinner. And I thought of the night I'd stared at the bathroom mirror, bald and pale and hollow-eyed, wondering if it would be easier to just slip away quietly. But I didn't. I chose to fight, not for anyone else, not for validation or pity, but for me, for the version of me who deserved a full, vivid life. And now I chose to live not just for myself, but for the little life growing inside me, and for the tiny one soon to be born into the world through my daughter, a grandmother, a mother, a woman reborn. When I finally stood, the wind outside had picked up. I wrapped my coat tighter, stepped out onto the Chicago sidewalk, and felt the weight of the past months lift slightly with each step. That night, I stood by the window in my apartment, the same apartment that once felt like a prison, filled with bitterness and silence. Now it felt different. The city lights blinked in the distance. Somewhere beyond the hum of traffic and the rhythm of footsteps below, life kept moving, and so would I. I pressed my palm to the glass, then to my belly. No more surviving, no more shrinking, no more silence. I chose life for real this time, and I wasn't going back. Not ever.